we're seeing battery storage, which is the number one thing that we really need right now to kind of trim those peaks and those peak hours. Battery storage is being used for two reasons on the operator side: to create a digital moat around the very expensive AI compute that's just been unboxed and racked up, right? Protect the power quality coming in, but also to help tame those huge transient swings. And then thirdly, the battery storage gives you a flexibility lever, again, to speed you through interconnection. But yeah, all the way to the rack. I mean, there's flexibility measures all the way to the rack. But that's another new thing that we've been seeing, is storage getting adopted very quickly, which is what we love to see. Hi, it's David Chernis from CPower Energy, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. And power availability has become one of the biggest constraints, not just domestically, but globally throughout data center growth, throughout data center developments. Today, I'm joined by David Chernis, who is Director of Flexible Compute for CPower Energy. David's based in New York, company's headquartered in Baltimore. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Joshua. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for joining me. Thrilled to have you with me today. So the first place I really wanted to start was to understand a little bit of the context of what's changed in recent months, what's changed in the last year that's all of a sudden made this topic of energy flexibility so much more urgent for data center operators.
Yeah, so for everyone that's been seeing the headlines, while the utilities were preparing for electrification of heat, EV loads, after years of energy efficiency measures to reduce load on the grid, right out of the gate comes ChatGPT. December, what was that? Was that 24 now? Meteoric load growth, right? And now we're seeing the problem is that we won't have enough power between now and 2030. We can't build enough generation in this gap to do all the stuff we need to do to keep AI innovation in the United States, which is a national security issue at this point. So what's the solution? The solution is we live at the intersection of the solution between the grid operators, the utilities, and these large loads. And that solution is data center flexibility. I think, we mentioned Tyler Norris's Duke University study about data center flexibility as being kind of the shot heard around the world. I guess that was about a year and a half ago now. Things are moving so quickly. But we're just talking about an incremental flexibility for these large loads, solving this problem and freeing up, 70, 80, 90 gigawatts of additional capacity so that we can do what we need to do, connect what we need to connect here in the United States, and build what we need to build.
Yeah, it's such a strange disconnect between how data center operators and developers the reception that they're getting from local communities. They're not even really asking the right question of what's possible with innovation. This whole idea of energy flexibility, like you mentioned, wouldn't have even been an issue if it wasn't for AI and machine learning and generative AI coming out of the mainstream in the last 2-3 years. What do you think data center operators, whether it's AI data center factories or HPC or traditional colocation data centers or mining owners, what do you think that they most misunderstand about how the utility companies and the grid operators actually see them?
I think the first misconception that's starting to change is that the assumption that the power is there is that assumption is false now.
That somebody else will figure it out.
Yeah, the power is not there. And then starting to understand, we've been working on this for years with our partners. We've built an ecosystem of different technology partners. The other assumption is that data center load is not flexible. And that's coming out of, our traditional data center customers who are really real estate investment trusts, and they pass the energy costs through, and the energy's always been there for them. What we're starting to see is in this new type of data center, the AI factory, because loads can be geographically shifted in and out of different constrained grid regions, and we can actually flex everything from the storage to the cooling, to the compute itself, without pausing the work, without harming the SLA and the quality of service, we can actually bring that flexibility now. So the assumption that the power is there is false, and the assumption that the compute itself can't be flexed is also false now, if we're talking about large AI inference clusters, anywhere from a 10 megawatt cluster to a gigawatt. So there's a new this new data center type, the AI factory. It's possible for this type of large load to not be a burden on the grid, but to be an asset for the grid by having all of these flexibility levers that I've been mentioning going in to the interconnection agreement. So that gives you your best shot of having that power there when you go in ready to work with the grid.
It's really fascinating too, as you're explaining flexibility, because that's only something that landed on my radar screen maybe 6 months or a year ago. But the idea of flexibility on the infrastructure, on the IT infrastructure side, as opposed to the facilities infrastructure side, has been around for, I guess, a good 15, 20 years at this point. When I think of flexibility, I think of elasticity, like Amazon Web Services, dating back to the late 2000s, early 2010s. So everyone's very, very comfortable with that idea. On the compute, on the technology side. On the energy side, I imagine takes a lot more education.
So many things it's just a brand new world with the AI factory design and the way that those power profiles move. They're incredibly spiky. Talking to these engineers at all of these conferences that I go to the past 2 years, you might see a spike of a large cluster, let's say a 10 megawatt inference load, 100% power suddenly spiking up from 30%, finishing the workload going back down. These are massive swings utility is not really able to deal with. So what we're seeing for the first time is because there's so much capital also being thrown at AI factory development, we're seeing battery storage, which is the number one thing that we really need right now to kind of trim those peaks and those peak hours. Battery storage is being used for two reasons on the operator side: to surround, create a digital moat around the very expensive AI compute that's just been unboxed and racked up, right? Protect the power quality coming in, but also to help tame those huge transient swings. And then thirdly, the battery storage gives you a flexibility lever, again, to speed you through interconnection. But yeah, all the way to the rack. I mean, there's flexibility measures all the way to the rack. But that's another new thing that we've been seeing, is storage getting adopted very quickly, which is what we love to see.
ESS or BESS, I hear a lot about the energy storage systems.
Yeah, and we're partnered with several large data center infrastructure providers, and they're confirming that also there's a real appetite for BESS for energy storage right now.
So when you speak with data center operators, regardless of their business model, regardless of their size, the context, what do the best practices look like for modern demand response? How does this actually work in a mission critical environment? What is the facilities leader, the engineer, thinking about when they meet with you?
Well, ideally, there's a couple different ways we think about this. And as I mentioned, we've created an ecosystem of different technology partners, all bringing these different levers that we can use. And where we used to just partner with maybe one technology service provider, now there's a whole team of people looking at different things. So ideally, we would want to be involved early on during design phase. That could be a couple years early, but if that's not possible, then sometimes we'll come in through EPC firm. Certainly when there's batteries involved, we like to help there. Sometimes we'll get involved with the discussion when the developer, the end user, is having that interconnection discussion with the utility, whether that's ERCOT or PJM, MISO, and we can come in and help engineer the flexibility side, pulling in our partners with us, or coming in through the partner who's already incumbent and working with the data center.
So it seems we're becoming ever more ecosystem centric every couple of weeks, every month that goes by. I mean, we track 57 different niches within the data center industry, but it seems like that hasn't even kept up with the amount of segmentation and specialization that's happened in the last 12, 18 months.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's such an amazing time for innovation. I like to say that AI, the rise of the fourth industrial revolution, AI compute is creating the grid constraint, but it's also helping to solve the problem. We're seeing these incredibly fast, nimble, and really interesting, very niche software and AI companies coming into market out of stealth and just doing some really cool stuff. Being able to model each electron moving through a data center, seeing at that level, that granularity, how power is flowing, where you might be able to squeeze a little more capacity out of one element in your design. So maybe you don't need 100 megawatts for your design. Maybe you only need 80. These kinds of like agentic AI tools are going to help us solve this problem and really move fast.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how the operators figure all this out. How do they figure out what actually is flexible versus what could compromise uptime or their service level agreements? But as you mentioned, a lot of this, is that primarily what CPower Energy works on, is kind of driving the management platform of what needs to go up, what needs to come down to make this flexibility all happen?
I'd say for the most part, we orchestrate the grid signals as they come in, whether they're day ahead grid emergencies dispatches or real time. We've got to the point where we can do, we can react to grid signals in seconds to milliseconds. The only limiting factor there is what our SCADA-based telemetry can do. But we provide market access to all of these different programs, all of these grid reliability programs, and bring the grid dispatch signal to the facility. At that point, it's taken up by the DSIM or the miner management software platform. If you're mining, any of the GPU management and automation, like super specialized AI compute flexibility software partners we have, they will then go and they have all of the controls to orchestrate what's happening inside, in the white space, in the gray space, outside in the yard for the generation, the storage. But as I said, as this stuff gets more complicated, space is evolving really rapidly. But we have, a lot of different partners and services that we rely on to create the most fitting, tailored flexibility plan for each use case, for each end user.
As the space is rapidly emerging, we're seeing a lot of developers clamoring around workforce talent shortages, or at least the perception of workforce talent shortages. At the same time, we see a lot of legacy technology companies and SaaS companies rethinking workforce. You're at a pretty, I'd say probably mid-career place, pretty well established. When you run into a colleague that you haven't seen in years, maybe you're really close to them, former coworker, you bump into them at a conference or at the airport, and you catch up with them over coffee or lunch, and you sense that they're a little burned out and they're trying to figure out what their next career move should be. What would you talk about with that friend to help them get back on track?
I just think, this is such an exciting time. I don't think in my lifetime I've ever seen innovation moving at this pace before. I really believe that, with AI as a tool, if you have a new idea, you can go and execute it. Basically, I compare this to like the early days of the internet, the first browser, I think it was Mosaic, where you could type into it. And, imagine Jeff Bezos, who's got his book selling business, saying, wow, gosh, this is really neat. I wonder if I can sell books with this thing. And, flash forward to now, he sells everything because he kind of had the idea first. seeing a lot of great tech startups happening. But I'd say, for someone looking to reboot in the data center industry, learn the language, learn the three tribes: facilities, critical power, IT workloads, energy markets, regulation. Go to where the constraint is. To me, that's where all the action is. Where's the problem that needs to be solved? And that's where you'll find all of the innovation. Right now, it's interconnection, figuring out the flexibility piece for me. I love working on this problem. And I think actually we've solved it. It'd be interesting to see what's going to happen this year. But yeah, go to where the action is and use all of these amazing new generative and agentic tools for ideation and execution. It's really an amazing time of opportunity we're living in.
As long as you're proactive and pick the right parts of the ecosystem that are expanding rapidly, as opposed to contracting it in those kind of mature stages. But yeah, this is all about being, and the great part with the tools is they'll tell you where to focus. I'm thinking of this sector, which kinds of companies, which kinds of careers, what should I focus on next? What do I need to upskill? That's the great part with the tools. It
is. And yeah, they're pretty good. Like I wrote like a career reboot, like executive summary for a friend, just to say, hey, have you tried this? Look what this can do. And it was really, really good.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
David, shifting gears a little bit towards tying these plans, tying energy to business outcomes for the operators, for the developers. When you think about grid participation, how do you think this is influencing site selection, expansion of existing properties, approvals, timelines? What are you seeing out in the field?
Yeah, I love this question. I kind of started in this compute automation for grid reliability with the crypto miners because they've got very large loads and they're fully flexible. They're not hosting anything. There's no SLA. They'll just go into sleep mode if the grid needs the megawatts back, and they'll actually probably earn more in that hour than they would be doing, than they would have been if they were mining. Because of the kind of the hunt for industrial sites with big substations that the crypto miners have been doing for the past, I'd say, 5 to 7 years, there's not a ton of easy sites, turnkey sites out there now. So the most recent thing, the newest development we've seen are powered land developers. It's kind of a new class of developer where they'll get the land, they'll get the interconnections. Likely there'll be some power generation and maybe some natural gas assets on the site. This is more common maybe in the Southwest and in Texas, then they provide a turnkey site where the mid-scale or the hyperscale tenant can come in and be a couple years ahead of the game. We're also seeing a trend, because the value of Bitcoin has come down pretty significantly from last year. I think last I looked, it was at 60 something, down from 128. It's a little harder for the miners right now, coupled with the pressure on power pricing, right? Power pricing is going up. So we are seeing the big publicly traded miners like Iron, who co-hosted Yada this year, which was the first time we saw the big public miners talking to and in the same room as the traditional data centers, and with the AI factory people in the middle. So we're seeing tier 3 AI hosting facilities being built on existing crypto mining sites, which is a great model, right? Because they already have the powered land. They're going to probably earn more in this economic environment hosting. They have to pay for the tier 3 infrastructure. But then you have this great hybrid computing model, which I personally love because you've got all the flexibility. Let's say you have 50 megawatts of mining load that is fully, automated to the grid. It can go into sleep mode and get offline in like milliseconds to seconds, right? So you can do things like frequency regulation on the ASIC side of the house. And then on the GPU side of the house, you can do all of the other more fractional incremental curtailments that we're talking about, unless you have that storage moat, in which case you have full freedom. But having the flexible compute and then the AI compute on the same site makes a lot of sense. And some people, there was a white paper, I can't remember who wrote it recently, arguing for AI factories to also have mining load to kind of give that flexibility side there in really volatile energy markets like SPP.
What's super interesting about that is I noticed just in the consulting work that we do about 12 or 18 months ago, we started to see a lot more mining entrepreneurs approaching us looking for guidance on pivoting into their business model being AI data centers.
It's happening. Yeah, it's happening, especially in this high energy cost environment. And it's tougher to, Bitcoin is in a slump right now. So I don't expect mining, big mining sites to 100% pivot over though. I think they'll retain some mining infrastructure there. It's just my 2 cents.
Do you think we're at a place where grid participation has now become table stakes for new data center developments, or is this still only part of the market?
Boy, we're seeing regulation, and of course, Senate Bill 6 in ERCOT was passed last September, requiring large loads over 75 megawatts to basically they can turn them off. DR becomes a requirement. There's a added fee to get a faster review of your interconnection application. I think we're kind of looking at Texas as the model. A lot of chatter and regulatory discussions happening in PJM, or along in Data Center Alley. That's a really constrained area, and that's a real problem. I always tell people, just go in with some flexibility measure or plan in your design, and just be ready for that. Just be ready, prepare yourself for success, and be ready to be able to take a fast lane to interconnection. Go in to help the grid help you. And I think, I think that's where you're gonna be most successful.
So you're in an interesting place in your career where most of your early work was in sales, and now you're considered a subject matter expert on energy flexibility and grid-related issues. From a practical standpoint, for someone that's in a sales leadership role or go-to-market leadership role, what have you seen that when you look at your peers in similar kinds of functions that you work with, what do you find that they are thinking works but rarely does, that tends to really frustrate them and feel like they're just spinning their wheels?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think that just be prepared for an increasingly fast automation of a lot of back office work that we're used to doing manually. I think that's going to free up our sales leaders and our sales athletes to go out and really focus on the relationship, the consultative part of our job. And I think all of the administrative and back office things that we're used to doing, I think we're going to very soon have, agentic tools that'll streamline that for us. So my biggest piece of advice for sales professionals, or really any professional right now, is make sure you're really using these tools, exploring them, and you're going to just be so much more productive. And I see sales executive roles really transforming it over the next 12 months with these new AI workflows coming in. And then In terms of, for me, what's been great for me in terms of building my network, being on the scene at conferences, participating as much as you can in panels, thought leadership, going and finding the companies that interest you and talking to them, and channel partnerships for us at CPower. That's really a primary mechanism for us. So, approach through a partner where you make a really great fit. And as I mentioned earlier in this call, now we've got these, multi-partner bundled services kind of market approaches that really seem to be providing a lot of value to the customer. So we're getting very specific in how we're approaching the market.
Yeah, it's super fascinating because we look at the big picture trends over the last 5 or 10 years where sales processes become a lot more consultative, a lot more like being a teacher, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, even in some cases being seen more as a thought leader. And we're finding a lot of legacy teams are having difficulty with this transition because it's such a big culture change, but they're all largely facing the same frustration of, I want to not be seen as a vendor. I'm facing commoditization. How do I fix that? How do I get in early enough to really shape the narrative? So we're seeing a lot of teams too that are hiring non-traditional hires into biz dev and sales roles. They're hiring IT professionals who never worked on a sales team before onto supporting sales teams. They're hiring engineers, and then the people that have been around a while, like yourself, are upskilling. Like we saw with the colocation providers, it was super common to find account executives and account managers going out and getting the same training and certifications that their prospects and clients have. Or we're setting up computer labs, like a whole rack. I've had multiple guests on the podcast that have talked about the rack of the micro data center that they have in their home office that allows them to learn and upskill. Is there a version of that for energy professionals like yourself?
I mean, certainly. I mean, take advantage of all of this great executive education that's out there. I really I got to spend some time at Wharton over a summer, virtually, studying digital assets and economics of blockchain. And my keystone project was like a tokenization of demand response. Harvard Business School has great AI executive training. Babson is another one that I participated in. Put the time in to educate yourself. Make sure you are using these tools and seeing what's out there, and always understand what's coming. With all of this great innovation comes disruption, right? And I've seen disruption firsthand for myself a couple of times. So kind of recognize it when I see it. So it's a great way to kind of stay out ahead and just make sure that you're always learning. I think in that first AI course at Harvard with a great instructor named Mike Grandinetti, who's a very respected entrepreneur and speaker. He said, like in the past, you'd have to reskill, maybe every 5 to 7 years, refresh what you know. And now everything's moving so fast, you need continuous upskilling, continuous re-education, because we're starting to move into a real warp speed here with the innovation that's happening. So continuous learning, that's my 1-word answer, I'd say. 2-word answer.
For data center operators, either on the IT side or on the executive team or on the facility side, that are relatively new or even brand new to energy flexibility, where's the first place you would tell them to go learn more about this, to get educated before they overcommit?
Well, that's what we do. I mean, we'll come in and provide consultation. There's no fee there. We'll come in and assess, what you have, where your flexibility lies. Our engineering will come in. We're basically people like me who are subject matter experts and know the energy markets, and then we have all of this regulatory strength over here to keep our customers safe, and then we have all of this engineering over here. So our engineers will come in, understand a facility, listen to the facility operators, and then make suggestions of where the flexibility levers are. But again, if you're considering battery storage, that's like top line number one. That's your flexibility lever there. We have a whole team that just worked with storage. And then, on the cooling side, with all of these really cutting edge new DSIMs and software layers that can kind of optimize cooling workloads, whether that's direct liquid cooling or air cooling, all the way to the rack. You have a ton of optionality. So we can help with the how.
That's fantastic. And it's really reaffirming of the same exact findings that we see across the board throughout the US and globally, where in a buyer's journey that's increasingly hostile towards traditional sales approaches, where they're doing almost all the research on what they're going to buy before they're buying, the last way, especially in the environment where people love talking to their favorite generative AI tool all day, the last frontier for getting in early and often to educate and build trust most of the time is figuring out a way to become part of their learning and development, become basically in the professional development business. So this whole idea of sales professionals as teachers is very, very real. The challenge is being client-centric enough and partner-centric enough to understand what's really going on in their world so you can add value in their own language, as opposed to them feeling like you're just coming in to focus on your own commercial interest. But a lot of companies, it sounds like CPower is doing a really good job with that as well.
I could have said it better. That's perfect, Joshua. Yeah, and here's an example of that. Data center is going to procure backup generation, not prime power, but compliant, hopefully EPA compliant diesel generation. This happens so frequently. They'll go buy the backup generators without really knowing that if they had spent a little more on tier 4 final compliant EPA compliant diesel gens, that wouldn't just be this massive capital expense sitting out there waiting for the lights to go out. You could actually use the EPA compliant tier 4 final generation to earn money in the grid reliability programs. So it's bring us in early, and that example is something that we've helped data centers with. Here are the engines you should procure for a little bit more capital expense. You're going to earn all of this grid revenue, and you'll be able to help keep the lights on in your neighborhood. And there's that, the community benefit. So those kinds of pre-sale, design phase guidances we can provide for sure.
It sounds like one of the big challenges, but enormous opportunities, is to unlock all the different kind of stakeholders. Because originally, when you started explaining this, it sounded like energy management, facilities, sustainability folks, but then you mentioned something that would be music to the ears of any CFO or any government affairs leader.
Yeah. It's nice to have the CFO in there because they actually care about the dollars. And then the regulatory side, we're really, we have a super robust regulatory team in every deregulated energy market. And that's a big part of our strength, I think. But yeah, mitigating risk, making sure everyone's doing the right stuff, avoiding penalty, and that they're in good shape to earn revenue in the programs.
David, what a fascinating part of the data center industry this is right now, to watch this all evolving on what just as recently as 10 years ago may have been considered a sleepier part of the data center industry. Even like battery storage and generators were probably headed towards a place where people just kind of dismissed energy and power as just, oh yeah, it's there. But now it's become so front and center because of the rapid growth and the grid shortages. So it's really, really cool to see what CPower Energy is working on with all this. If someone wants to follow what you're working on, learn more about you, learn more about CPower, is LinkedIn the best place to start?
That's a great place. And that's another tip for salespeople. I mean, I find that's the best place to connect with people for cold outreach. And I certainly welcome connection requests and start the conversation there.
Cool. Include links to your LinkedIn profile, the LinkedIn company page for CPower Energy, and the website for CPower Energy as well. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. I've been speaking with David Chernis, who's director of the flexible compute platforms for CPower Energy. Thanks so much, David.
Thank you, Joshua. It was a pleasure.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.